We've been very fortunate. We've got some fabulous people joining us today. We've got Brandon Taylor, who is the Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy Manager for TAFE in Queensland. Sheena Cranwell, who is also from TAFE Queensland, who is the Accessibility Service Officer. And Stephen Manson, who is the Manager of the Disability Service. Sorry, Stephen, I didn't actually grab the title of your team from TAFE SA. Very unfortunately, Linda Glover, who was going to be who is a Disability Liaison Officer for TAFE Tasmania, has come down sick and is an apology. Today we are providing closed caption or captioning for you, and also Auslan interpreting. So please, if you need to pin your interpreter, do so, and you can access the closed captions in the CC button at the bottom of your screen. We're going to wing this session a little bit today. Brandon's only with us for a very short time, but we thought Brandon for a very short time was, good enough, because we'd rather have him than not have him. So he's going to join us. Well, I'll ask a few questions. We were very fortunate to receive a lot of questions in registration, so we'll ask those. But at times we want to either go to the chat or ask people to put their mics on if they're comfortable to do that and ask questions, just so the session does become a little bit more interactive. So we will see how it goes. So I just might hand over quickly to each of our panelists just to give you a little bit of an overview of their role and a little bit of history of themselves. So I might start with you, Brandon, first.
Thanks, Darlene. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Brandon. I'm currently the Manager of Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy for TAFE Queensland. But prior to that, for many, many years, was the Student Support Manager, looking after the disability counselling, Indigenous and international student support. Prior to that, was a disability officer for many years in TAFE Queensland and in the same system in the UK, and a teacher specifically of students with disadvantage and disabilities in the college system over there.
Brilliant, thank you. Now over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Darlene, and hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Stephen Manson. I manage the student services at TAFE SA. I've been in the at TAFE in the vet sector for about 5 years, and prior to that I worked for many years in the university sector at UniSA, managing their access and inclusion services, and for a time the counselling services there as well. And worked in the disability sector for a number of years, a social worker by training, and enjoying what I do, and happy to be here with you guys today.
Great, thank you, Stephen. And Sheena? Oh, you're on mute still.
Sorry about that. Hi everyone, my name's Sheena. I've been working with TAFE Queensland as an accessibility officer for over 5 years now. I guess I also have a background in social work and have worked in student support in the university sector as well. I also have lived experience and experience as a carer of a mum of a child with a disability. So I'm quite passionate about inclusiveness in training and education.
Thank you. Thanks all for that. Okay, we're going to kick off with a question for Brandon, as he's going to leave us soon. So we thought we'd give him a curly one to begin with, and make him work for his money that he's not getting. So Brandon, why is access and inclusion important in the vet sector?
Thank you, Darlene. Yeah, what a great question to start with. Look, I think the one thing that I say to people to answer that question is quite simply this. Here we are in 2021. Access and inclusion is still important simply because the Disability Discrimination Act itself is nearly 30 years old. The Disability Standards for Education, nearly 20 years. Despite improvements, despite significant increases in awareness of different disabilities and impacts on students in the vet sector. Sadly, the statistics still tell us that the employment rates for people in Australia with disability are still significantly below those of people without disability. And if we dig a little deeper into that, we need to look at what the options and the choices are. And this is where the vet sector really, really does have a part to play. So for me, the importance of access and inclusion is quite simply about ensuring that people have choices and they have options just as anybody else would have, because that enables, empowerment at a very individual level. And it's a very powerful opportunity that ourselves as disability practitioners, but also as vet educators actually play. And we might not realise these wonderful opportunities in education and training that we can provide. So for me, that's really why access and inclusion is important. And that's the angle that I take.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Anybody else want to add anything or move on? So feel free to add any questions or thoughts into the chat box. We do want to make this session as interactive as possible, so feel free to give a shout out to your other colleagues, or confirm what the speaker said, or argue back with what we say, or ask questions. So really happy to be interactive, and as I said, if people are comfortable, we'll ask people to turn their mic on and ask questions at different points as well. So the next question that we were given is around our practice as disability practitioners, and the question was, what are the main principles of practice? So Stephen, I might throw to you for this one.
Yeah, I'll try and unmute myself.
Good.
Here we go. Achieve that. Principles of practice. Well, I'd probably start for new practitioners. Well, why might it be important? And for me, having principles that you kind of fall back to when you're working in a role where you're very often dealing with things that you've never dealt with before. Every scenario, every student is a bit different. Every kind of combination of individual student with different types of disabilities, doing different sorts of courses. It is a role where part of the joy, I think, in it is that you're dealing always with different sorts of situations. And probably to avoid being seen as being a factory for creating access plans, you really kind of need to have some principles that you can sort of fall back on to help with the problem solving, the decision making, sort of just guiding your practice. Probably one of the first ones I would lean to is a student-centred approach. We hear that kind of bandied around a fair bit, but what does that mean in practice? But probably for me, it's kind of listening, being interested in the stories of our students and listening and actually taking on board what we're hearing from our students. And that can manifest in lots of different ways. So both at an individual level with the students that you're working with, but also when you're thinking about the systems that you work in, and how do we kind of make sure that students are providing some voice in the decision making that goes on around the place, and the sort of processes in the services that we deliver, that we're attentive to what students are telling us about what works and what doesn't and what they want us to do. So that's probably my sort of starting point, is student-centred. I think within our context, a life cycle kind of student life cycle approach as well, like bearing in mind what the student journey looks like. So, from the decision making about maybe applying for a course, maybe sometimes, gathering up the resources and the courage to actually apply and enrol. That what can be an overwhelming kind of process of getting orientated and getting started, and then sort of moving into the process of developing skills and knowledge, acquiring, learning, and being assessed, which can be quite confronting. and then through to that journey that Brandon mentioned around kind of completing and looking for work. And I think looking at that life cycle approach, how does that help us? Well, I think one of the things it identifies is that there are some points of risk for students with disability on that journey, and particularly for me, you're sort of thinking about front-ending stuff a little bit. So how do we make sure that we don't lose students early on when they're dealing with the challenge of transition? So establishing those kind of supports early, building trust and connection, and explaining the sort of, where we fit within the system, the sort of role that we can play, and how we can be an ally for our students in sort of navigating what can be complex systems.
Brilliant.
Shall I go on? There's a couple more. Well,
I'll go for it.
There's a grab bag, I think, because and I think this is for every practitioner to think, well, what are the things that you lean to? But just bear in mind that so that you're not that you can see the wood for the trees kind of thing, that you've got something that you fall back to that guides your practice a bit. So I think to a degree a case management approach, so thinking about sort of assessment processes, intervention, how do we kind of then review that practice and ensure that we're kind of managing that kind of interaction and engagement intervention with our students effectively. A rights-based kind of approach. So what does that kind of talk to us about? Things like, valuing the ethics and the rights to education and the inclusivity and equity in what we do. Probably also valuing and thinking about universal design. So minimising the need for interventions where we can, so that we're actually looking at the systems that we're working with and trying to maximise participation of our students through that. So rather than just providing adjustments and sort of trying to make students fit into a system that's not quite right, that as practitioners we're thinking about, well, how do we make this system as much as possible work for everybody? Yeah, and I think it's worth having a look at the WHO disability model and sort of that mix of a medical and social model. So both attending to the fact that we've got our students have a range of disability related things that go on, but there's also the context is super important, and that social model. So, and also the psychological aspects of what's going on for our students. So that biopsychosocial kind of model of disability, I think, as well. So that's my
That's brilliant. You brought up a range of topics there. So if you are new to the sector and actually haven't come from the disability area, I really encourage you to look up the different models of disability that Stephen spoke about then, because it's often the challenge for us is that many of us in our practice support the social or the human rights framework or model, but we actually are very much based in the medical model in some ways, because we do require people to prove their disability often through a medical diagnosis. So how do we kind of work or marry those two together? I think is a question that we often ask ourselves as practitioners. So I'm going to just pose a question. What other principles do you think are important in the chat box? So if people wanted to add stuff there, that would be great. But feel no pressure to do that, because I know I can't do two things at once very well. Now, we did talk about, I think, Brandon, when you first raised the issue around the legal framework, and you talked about the disability standards in education and the disability. Why am I missing the other one?
The DDA.
The DDA. I was getting caught up in my DDSs, and yeah, so the DDA. So they're the two most significant legal frameworks. But why are they important, or why is it important for us to understand what the legal framework is? So Brandon, did you want to answer that?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think for any new practitioner for this space, you've really got to be confident in your knowledge of what those disability standards are. And the good thing is that, if you look online, there is frankly a very clean, quick, brief guide. And it's as much about understanding that it isn't just about teaching delivery and reasonable adjustments. It's actually about access to information about courses, which then comes back to people having choice and being able to make informed choices. The disability standards as well, they do make it explicit and incredibly clear what our obligations are as entities and organisations in the vet sector. And as much as disability officers and services, our own areas are important, it's not actually just for us. We're a point of contact for students and staff, but the responsibility for applying the disability standards as a norm in everyday teaching, access, delivery, services, whatever it may be, that responsibility sits with the organisation as a whole, with every educator. And you know, before I disappear, because I do have to leave shortly, I just wanted to say, look, Stephen mentioned as well about communication. Your networks and communication, this is what I would say to new practitioners, are absolutely vital. You've got local and national networks as practitioners with other practitioners, but please make the time to get to know your teachers, your trainers and your educators at your organisations, because vet practitioners, vet teachers on the whole are absolutely invested in their students. They more often than not practice reasonable adjustment, whether they realise it's reasonable adjustment or not, because it is the nature of the vocational sector. And it's a partnership, it's a collaboration, and it's about being as much a support and advice and a consultation service to educators as it is as much about students. And it's about helping to empower the educators as much as well. I could say so much, Darlene.
I know, it's such a shame that you have to leave us. But yeah, no, I think you've raised an important part is, you know, often we do think that it is that one-on-one with students, the developing learning access plans and so forth, or accessibility plans, but it is that broader picture too of ensuring that the educators or teachers that we're working with are aware of their responsibilities and that they're teaching as inclusive as possible. So I framed another question in the chat was, does your educators know about their responsibilities under the disability standards in education? It would be great to hear if people feel like their teachers or educators within their vet, in their institution are aware of that. So do you need to leave us, Brandon? Are you...
I'm sorry, but I do. I'd love to stay. Thank you very much. And look, my leaving message will simply be this: you're not on your own. No disability practitioner is expected to be an expert on every situation, on every scenario. And there are networks that you can lean on, which include all of us and many other very experienced people. And you can guarantee that someone else has walked through a scenario or a situation before you. There's a lot of experience and knowledge out there to share. And as practitioners, we tend to be very good at sharing in this space.
Great. Thank you. And I hope the day goes well for you.
Thank you very much, guys. Take care.
Okay. Has anybody got any questions that they want to ask before I ask the next one? Feel free to put your hand up.
I was just going to, Darlene, it's Sheena here.
Yeah.
I was just going to, when we're sort of looking at that legal framework, just something that I sort of find is quite important is to remember what our students' legal right is around disclosure and whether they want to disclose to their training organisation as well. We sort of have some policies that we sort of work around, that the student has to approach our service about disclosure of our service or registering with our service, because it's their right and their information. So that's something, I guess, around those legal frameworks that I sort of practice too anyway.
Yep. And Stephen, does TAFE SA have a similar approach?
Yeah, well, I think it's certainly an interesting space, the one that kind of competing tension between being really careful with the private information that students provide us when they're developing access plans, but at the same time allowing a good sort of flow of information and transfer of information to lecturers that aligns with what the students' kind of perceptions and expectations around that are. And there's some tensions in there, I think, that most institutions sort of can struggle with a little bit at times. And I know that we at TAFE SA, we've been kind of pondering some of these issues and thinking about if there are better ways that we can both maintain students' kind of privacy and confidentiality of information, but also make sure that that lecturers that need to be aware of stuff to support our students, that they do have good access to that sort of information.
Yeah, and there is, a number of tension or, points that that kind of work like that. And I suppose that kind of is a lovely segue into the next question, is what is reasonable when making reasonable adjustments? That's often, as a new practitioner, for us that have been in the sector for a while, we kind of think we know it, but at times are always challenged often with that question. So Stephen or Sheena, who wants to start to answer that one or begin to answer? You're right, Sheena? Yep.
Yeah, it's defining reasonable is, our work is very grey. Our work is very grey. And I guess with all of our programs, there is not a set line of what is reasonable for that specific area. Sometimes it's up to negotiation. I guess for myself, I consider when someone comes to me with a request, I've had several requests for students to be able to Zoom into a classroom that's been delivered online, which sounds like a reasonable thing for myself. But then there's a whole lot of other things that are there. So, that's a tricky one. I know that Brandon has done some webinars with our teaching staff on that, because it's something that we face on a daily basis. I always have to go to the faculties and talk to them around when I don't know about the specific things relating to a subject area or a course, because I'm not a course content expert. That's what I always say to my student. I'm not a course content expert. We're going to have to look at what the course delivery plan is and how it fits into the criteria to what we can work around with that. I mean, a simple one is delivery of, if a student can't deliver a talk to a class of 30 students because of anxiety, a background of anxiety or social anxiety, talking with the faculty around presenting in front of 3 students. But then I've got a program that will identify it must be done in front of 10 students. So there's always to and fro's. And I don't know, Stephen, if you've probably got something a bit more to add.
Well, yeah, no, I agree, Sheena. It's reasonable is an intentionally vague word, I think, in the legislation. I guess I kind of fall back a bit to the disability standards as well, because we do know a bit about what's not reasonable, and we know it's not reasonable not to respond to a student's request for reasonable adjustments. We know that you need to respond in a timely manner. We know that you need to give reasons. And so these are in working through with the academics, I think as access and inclusion advisors, it's not our role to necessarily unpack the training package and to make decisions about what's reasonable within the context of a particular training package. But I think our role is to support the academics or the lecturers to kind of do that and understand what their obligations are within that space. And so I think as long as we're engaging positively with lecturers and students around that process and making sure that, that we're kind of communicating with students about their request and that it's being dealt with in a timely way, and that there are, there's reasonableness to the decisions that are made about adjustments that have been requested, so that you can't just say, no, you can't do that and not have any basis for it. If there's a reason that an adjustment can't be provided that relates to the core competencies in a training package, then we're looking for alternatives. If there are reasons that relate to resourcing that are just too great, that's always a bit of a dodgy area. But if there are resourcing issues that are seen as being a challenge, that we're explicit about that, and the students always got to fall back to they can make a complaint if they need to, if they feel that that the decision's not been a fair one. But yes, and transparency around that process and communication and helping the lecturers to understand what their obligations are, I think is at the core of that one.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant way to say it. I kind of feel like we should be doing a Wordle or something at the same time, putting all the skills down of what we need as practitioners. I mean, I think one of those is pivotal, is that key negotiation. I mean, we need to be good communicators, but also that ability to negotiate a situation like that around trying to what is reasonable. For those who haven't engaged, sorry, Sheena, for those who haven't engaged in the Disability Standards and Education review that happened last year, there have been some recommendations made in that around trying to unpack a little bit more about what reasonable is. I don't know how far we'll come with that, but it's an interesting document if people want to have a read of it. So, Sheena, did you want to say something else with that?
No, I was just going to say how, again, we're coming back to that circle of making that connections with the teaching teams, and it's almost like a circle of support that's in our practice. So we're looking at working with the teaching team, the faculties, to actually come up and identify what is reasonable and things like that. So we're just always communicating and building those relationships for the outcomes.
I'd just add sort of briefly, without going on about it in that context as well, it is important, I think, probably for new practitioners in the vet space to have a look at training packages, have a look at the actual wording about competencies and the way the training packages are set up, and just familiarise yourself. You're not going to kind of read every training package, but get a sense of how they're structured and how you can actually source that information where you need to, and also the implementation guides that sit alongside those training packages, because they do include some wording around reasonable adjustments and support that's specific to the particular, sort of specific and sort of not to the training packages. And probably worth just noting in that space, there is some work that's happening at the moment, I believe, or kicking off, to try and improve the inclusivity of the training packages and be a bit more clear about what that they're not using wording and whatnot in the packages that's unnecessarily exclusionary.
Oh, and just a really quick thing, sitting in the classroom, being there while they're doing the task sometimes as a practitioner, if you have a chance in between your meetings with your students, being there is a really good thing. Popping into the class and sort of seeing what's happening in there, the delivery and so forth, can be really helpful.
Great, thank you. So that was actually the next question around the training package compliance and ensuring reasonable adjustments. So I think, it is, as Stephen said and Sheena, it's really important that disability practitioners get their head around their training packages, because it's one of the unique things around your role as disability practitioners in the vet sector versus, the higher education sector. So it's one of the reasons we've separated out the sessions today, was so that, we can unpack the difference in the roles. The next question was, what makes a good learning plan or access plan, or how do you prepare a good one? Is there any thoughts on that? I was kind of feeling guilty with only the two of you that...
Oh, look. And it's funny, isn't it? Because you get asked that, and it's probably something that we have a platform that we use at TAFE Queensland. We have a template that we do up. It's for me, as a practitioner, it's really important that I only disclose what my student feels comfortable with disclosing on that. So for me, it's something that the student has directly been involved with. What challenges they want to disclose, what strengths they want to disclose, and that they're sort of fully aware of the reasonable adjustments and things like that that we're looking at. So for myself, yeah, it's coming back to what Stephen was saying about being very student-centric and getting them to be actually involved and happy with that information. They're giving informed consent for you to distribute that. It's the next thing is that it's going to be easy for the teachers to read, for myself, knowing that it's been delivered, that the information that they need, say for exam adjustments and things, are easily read. And that's why we've sort of adjusted recently our template here at TAFE Queensland to apply some of those for easier access.
Stephen?
Well, I agree with all of the above, Sheena. So, and I think trying to avoid just being an access plan factory that kind of just comes out with standard sort of, the templates are great because they can make things kind of easier and give students some ideas and examples of the sorts of things that they can use. But I think both from a student point of view and from the lecturer's point of view, if it starts to feel like we're just filling in a form that doesn't kind of speak to the individual and their circumstances at all, then it starts to lose a bit of its purpose, I think. So being as a tool for the student, as a way of helping them with that kind of disclosure or that process of negotiating adjustments and just keeping to the purpose of what it's actually for. Sometimes I think we get lecturers who either want more information about more detail or they want to know more about the student's actual medical condition. So being able to kind of explain and be clear about the purpose of the access plan and how it is a tool for the student to help to negotiate, reasonable adjustments and support.
That's good.
And on the other hand, then you may get a student, I've had students who really just want me to disclose that they have a medical condition or that they've registered with the service. So their disclosure is just that they want their teachers to know that they have something that's impacting their studies, and these are the suggested reasonable adjustments. And so I sign off on that. And then I will most likely get a message back from the teacher, can you please explain? But at that time, I don't have permission to. So there's one of the little challenges involved there. But that's their choice. That's the student's choice, and they're right.
Just might have a little advertisement break here. Just on ADSET, so for people, hopefully all of the new practitioners here are aware of ADSET. We've broken that into 3 main areas, which is disability practitioner, students with disability, and educators or academic area. But under that, we've actually broken down disability and the adjustments that people would expect in their learning and their study, and in each of those areas. And so that's a really good tool for, I think, for students to actually kind of, if they haven't kind of, often at school they're not involved in these discussions before getting to the post-secondary education sector and may not, have unpacked what their needs are before. So it may be a really good tool to help them unpack. So, which would be great. All right. Just before I ask the next question, is there any questions from the audience at this stage? If you want to put your hand up or put into the chat box, feel free to chat in the chat box. I feel like we had a couple, but I'm feeling there's a one-way conversation here, but hopefully it means you're so busy listening to our fantastic speakers. Okay, the next question is, we kind of when we were meeting, we were talking about this, that, your role within the vet sector is really broad and diverse. You're often having to work, some of you may work for vet in schools or for schools. You may be working across foundation courses, right up to diploma level, and working across the apprenticeship and traineeships area. And so we just thought we'd unpack what are some of the tips to help practitioners navigate that broad area to kind of, what we said, hit the road running. So Stephen, what are some of the tips that you could give as a new practitioner? Yeah.
Thanks, Darlene. I think it's a bit of a tough question because it is such a broad kind of role, but I think just bearing in mind in the principles of practice that you're kind of working to, and that we do work with different cohorts. So there are different issues for school students that have got a school in the mix, and we might be working in close collaboration with the school around providing support for a school enrolled student. I think this space kind of varies a bit from state to state as how it operates. So you kind of need to get your head around the mechanics of what's happening in your own state and your own organisation. So we've got quite a lot of change happening at the school space at a kind of government level. And so needing to kind of keep abreast of what's happening in that space and how we work in collaboration with the schools and the sort of relationship and information that we need to share with schools to be able to effectively provide training to school students. So it's a kind of a different dynamic and a different, slightly different scenario. I think it's not dissimilar for apprentices. Well, schools also, obviously, you're working primarily with students that are under the age of 18, and so there's some different issues there as well around the role of parents and the experiences of school students generally not having been active partners in, negotiating or planning support. So we need to be really mindful of, where the school student sort of sits in that access plan development process, because they haven't normally actually had a voice or an expectation of having to be involved in that process at all. Apprentices and trainees, there are other issues because, there's an employer in the mix as well, and the way that delivery occurs is different, and if they're doing block placements, again, I think some of this varies a bit from state to state, but yeah, sort of, I guess as a practitioner being aware of and finding out about how those processes work, things like the DOORS program, which provides Commonwealth funding for apprentices and trainees with disability, and sort of how the mechanics of actually engaging with that funding and those services for apprentices and trainees. So it just, for me, it speaks to the need to be able to be a bit of a sleuth if you don't already have existing type processes in your organisation for understanding and unpacking those differences. You sometimes need to be able to be prepared to investigate and to make connections, and with the schools, you may have some key partner schools that you work with, and connecting up with the VET coordinators or the disability practitioners in the school environment and having working relationships happening with them as well. So, yeah.
Yep. So we mightn't have got you to hit the ground running. We may have you running for the hills with how complicated the role is, but hopefully it hasn't scared any of you off. I think, it's, there's a whole language around it as well. So, so it's a lot to learn, a lot to take on in your first couple of months of the role. Sheena, was there anything you wanted to add to that? No pressure too. But...
I just wanted to say that it is totally normal to feel completely overwhelmed in the first year, maybe 2 years. Look, across, it is exactly what Stephen said. You become a detective. You have a student turn up for a Certificate 3 level, and you can see that they actually need to get some more underlying skills. So then you walk over to another building and you find someone in the C program, delivering a lower level course with those base skills. So you are literally on the ground, moving around, finding out what you can as a detective, whether it's online, phone, feet. Yeah, definitely. It is just normal to feel overwhelmed, but somebody around you will know something about it. Our admin staff are amazing. Ring them up, ask more about the program. So yeah, definitely normal to feel overwhelmed in that first spot.
Okay, so staying with you, Sheena, and we've talked about the need to be a good detective and other things. What other advice would you give for people starting out in the role? So.
I think the other day when we had a little bit of a conversation before doing this forum today, it was brought up about, if as a practitioner, you're thinking, okay, so what if I have a student who requires Auslan interpreting and so forth, but I don't know anything about Auslan interpreting. Until you actually get a student who requires those services, hold off on that. I think concentrate on who's coming through the door, who your students are, listening to what they're saying to you and working with that student. I think for me, recognising that each student is unique no matter what their diagnosis is, the challenges, the reasonable adjustments that they're going to need are going to be different. How you frame things is going to be something as well. There's, using your writing skills, I think, is something. As an adult, I use my writing skills a lot because I just find that my writing skills are better sometimes than my verbal interaction. So I use those skills. Use those skills you have to create those links and create. I sort of mentioned before, I try to create a circle of support for my students so they feel connected. So I think the main thing is for your students is once they connect with you, that might be their first time that they've started working with somebody at TAFE, and you're that connection to connect them to the other supports for them to access the learning. So yeah, definitely listening with the students, being really proactive, and start building so you have gain that circle of support for your students so they feel that connectiveness to their studies and their course.
Excellent. Thank you. So we've talked quite a lot about the student-centric model, or the student at the centre, and we also touched a little bit about the importance of your relationship with educators and teachers and informing them of their responsibilities and roles around inclusive teaching and around the disability standards in education and so forth. Have you got any hints or tricks on how to develop relationships with the academics, educators or teachers in your organisation? So, Stephen, I might go to you first in that one.
Thanks, Darlene. Well, yeah, probably we mostly, I think, all work in such large organisations that using the channels that are there and kind of thinking about how you can sort of use them constructively. So, for instance, we have a principal lecturers network that's got all of the principal lecturers from across TAFE, and often there's 100 plus involved, and they meet every week pretty much. So getting a Guernsey to speak to them from time to time, and I think most institutions have some kind of newsletter that goes out to lecturers, and so getting information into those channels. We've actually got a quality kind of area which does the teaching and learning practice, and we've been working really quite closely with, we've actually recently got a great person who's a friend of Darlene's, Jen Cousins, whose job is actually around inclusive education within that sort of quality education space. So we work really closely with her around getting to lecturers through running workshops and the like, and be collaborating in that kind of space. Developing those sort of partnerships is, I think, really important. Yeah. Brilliant. As well as the individual stuff, like when you're connecting with lecturers and seen as being kind of a help in dealing with stuff that they haven't actually dealt with before, and we might not have dealt with before, but we try and approach with a bit of confidence. And the lecturers, I think, as Brandon noted earlier, you know, they're 99%, they're really kind of committed and in the right space in those engagements. So, you know, just working collaboratively with them, and that does build relationships over time, and then you become that sort of go-to person when they have another scenario that they haven't dealt with before, and they're looking for someone that can give them some help with it. So,
yeah. Sheena?
Yeah, I think for me, I always remind the teaching staff that I'm on their team as well. We're here to have good outcomes for our students, to come up with a plan that's going to work for them. So that's something that I involve them and remind them that I'm not the discrimination police. Or I sometimes feel like don't shoot the messenger on this one. We're all on the same team. I guess recognise for myself as a practitioner, recognising that I'm working inside a tertiary academic environment, providing, working with students with a disability. So I'm not working in a community service. I'm actually working in a training organisation. So sometimes me connecting that helps me with those interactions with them as well. I'll invite teachers along to meet students. If I have quite a complex student who has, we're going to have to make some quite significant reasonable adjustments to the program too. Having the teacher come along to the meeting, meet with the student before they start, and the teachers will often ask them some questions and come out and they say, I'm so glad that I met with your student because I can see why they're doing the course and their goals are there. So involving them in some of that process, the intake process and those discussions with the students makes them feel like part of the team as well. Yeah.
That's really important. Yep. Thank you for that. Now talking about Jen Cousins, Jen and another colleague in Queensland, Meredith, developed a resource in consultation with other TAFE providers around the country that provides information around access plans for vet educators for you to share with vet educators. I've just put that link into the chat now if people haven't come across that resource. So it may be another really good thing to share with your educators / teachers / academics, depending on your organisation. So the other thing I suppose that's unique often to the role, actually probably not, because in the higher education you still have industry placements, but what role do disability practitioners play in industry placements? So from your experience, Stephen, what role has the practitioners played?
I have to call out that it's a number of years since I've been involved in actually developing an access plan. So, and I lean heavily to my access and inclusion advisors and counsellors here to help sort of navigate this stuff. So I'll be really brief, but certainly placements are super important, obviously, and not really different from basically the whole practical kind of learning context where students are actually doing stuff when they're in class as well in the trades areas and the like. So, the role that we play as an organisation in making sure that those things are inclusive and being prepared to problem solve and listen and find out what the issues are, because there might be issues around OC health and safety, there might be issues around equipment that are difficult to resolve, there might be some research that's needed. I know we had a scenario that I wasn't directly involved in, but I know it was sort of interesting in working with a screen and media kind of area where there were sets that needed to be set up, and there's a wheelchair using student that had to sort of navigate this quite tricky environment, and it was around collaboration and just making sure that there was good communication, and the student was really awesome in being actively involved in what the adaptations kind of were going to look like. So yeah, I think it's an interesting space, and obviously one that's super important because it plays a massive role in that next step in terms of transitioning from training to employment, which is what the whole gig's about, really. So yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I guess one of the roles I've sort of taken, Darlene, when I've worked with students who have been going on placement, most of the area that I've worked in is in the teacher aid space, so education support. So that involves a lot of standing, playground duties, things like that. So for some of our students who may have some physical challenges, standing for half an hour is not going to be something that they're going to be able to do. So a lot of the times I'm working with the vocational team to come up with a plan for that student. It may be that they may need to do half days So have an extended period of time, because normally the vocation may run over, you know, a set amount of time, and it's expected for them to finish it within a 6-month period. But for some students, that's not going to be something they're going to be able to do because of the small amounts of time of their physical abilities there. So just negotiating to come up with something that's going to be accessible for the student, and providing the team with the reasoning why this is a reasonable adjustment for that student. We're not actually trying to be unreasonable in some of those spaces. So yeah, just providing education and information to help support their decisions there with the requirements.
Brilliant. I'm worried this question might be a big question probably to be asking when we haven't got many minutes left, but the role between supporting a student's needs and then the creating dependency, it's often one of those tension points as well, of often, you know, trying not to do too much for the student, but also knowing that, you know, because of maybe the impact of their disability, they may need extra support to succeed. What are some of the strategies or things to think about when you're a new practitioner around that, your kind of relationship with the students? So Stephen, or did you want to answer, or Sheena?
Yeah. I guess one of the things when we have a student starting off, our main aim is to make the environment as accessible for the student to participate and engage in their learning at that time. And then I guess one of the things that I work with them is building their study skills. So if they've got a pathway journey, and I think we talked about a journey earlier on, building those academic skills so they can actually become more independent on that. We have some study coaching and things like that on our campuses here at TAFE Queensland. But what they're working towards is the study skills, so the student can become a more independent learner, rather than we wouldn't take away the resources they need to access the environment. It's more about their skill set and they're building their competency and their academic skills. That's sort of where I...
Brilliant. Thank you. We've just had a question come in, so around how do you develop the knowledge and skills or the expertise that's required for the role. There was a question around qualifications, but at the moment it's pretty much on the job. We don't have any formal qualification for the role, but there are very diverse people. I think, as Sheena said, she has a social work background. We know many people who have an occupational therapist background. People come in teaching background. So it's a range of backgrounds, and I'm certainly want to look at something in the future where we can actually have some post-grad qualifications for disability practitioners. I think that would be a very powerful thing. But hopefully ADSET can provide you with a lot more information, but also a session like this can also kind of inform you and upskill you. So the final question is, have you got suggestions on where to find information or useful resources for people in their role, just kind of in a minute or two? So Stephen, I might start with you.
Well, just concur, Darlene. Yeah, you can't go past ADSET as a kind of a spot to go.
I'll pay you later.
Yeah. But also, I'd say use the Ofsted list. I think it's really reasonably quiet these days, just in terms of people kind of using Ofsted list as a spot to put questions out to the sector. And I think from a vet sector point of view, it certainly could, it could ramp up and be used more. If you've got a question about a particular scenario, it's rare that you will find that there's no kind of response from the sector to provide some advice and feedback on it, even if it's just a matter of pointing you to a resource. There are some really good international resources as well. I know some of the UK resources are quite neat around universal design and just in the access and inclusion space. So I think most people sort of start to develop their own collection of resources, both internally within your own institution and looking a little bit more broadly to the sector. And think, as Brandon noted, just building your own little networks and having people that you know that you can go to and you can check in with. I know I always had a few assistive tech people that I knew in different spots that were good for different types of tech questions to refer to, because it is a role where you're necessarily a bit of a jack of all trades, but not an expert on all the things that you're dealing with by any means, and not expected to be. So,
yeah, excellent. And Sheena, any final word for you in that? Sorry, you're on mute. Sorry, or
clicking the wrong button. Yeah, your networks, whether it's internal in your organisation, someone else who's in the same role as you, in your state, in Australia. You also, connect with, talk to your students about who their support services are. So their support service might be deaf services. They can provide you with a whole heap of information. Connecting with external organisations can be really helpful, and try and get on any free webinars that you can, because that's where you can get some of the best training from the practitioners who are out there at the moment working in specific areas. So yeah, definitely link in. Excellent. Wherever you can.
All right, and the only two ones I've got to add, it's Jane's just put in our newsletter link, so if people aren't a subscriber to the ADCET newsletter, you can subscribe there. And for new practitioners that haven't heard of the Australian Tertiary Education Network on Disability, which is ATTEND, that's our peak professional body for disability practitioners across the tertiary sector. I encourage you all to become a member of that organisation, and also they have state chapters that you can join and connect with others. Before we finish, we spoke about Brandon doing a presentation around reasonable adjustments and unpacking what's reasonable. He's provided us with that slideshow. It is probably more Queensland focused, but there is some really great gems in to help you unpack reasonable adjustments in that. We'll share that with everybody on here today. We will also put the video up and that and other information on our website so that you can come back and refer to it at any time. So coming to an end, thank you Sheena and Stephen. It's absolutely brilliant. It was great to have the conversation with you. I hope it's been of value to everybody here today. It's fantastic to see so many of you online. I'd also like to thank Karen and Ali for our Auslan interpreting and Tina for our captioning. So we've hit the 2 o'clock mark. So thank you everybody and have a great day.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Good luck. Ciao.